Thursday, 20th of July 2023. In this news flash, I'm going to talk about NATO and the pathetic stupidity of the people involved on the western side of that Ukraine war. And if you are a pre-programmed western drone, you better ready yourself, because you're going to bust a few hemorrhoids most probably with the things that I'm going to say in this. Yes, this is a news flash, but it's also going to be unadulterated revelation of the stupidity that is in the Western cabal trying to destroy Russia. Yes, destroy Russia. Forget Ukraine. Ukraine is a stepping stone. And I'm not even going to talk about that anymore. Listen to this. Spain announces supply of 4 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Spain's Minister of Defense, Margarita Robles, announced the transfer to Kiev of the last 4 Leopard 2 tanks that have not yet been delivered. They will arrive in Ukraine by sea next week. By sea. How is that going to work? That grain deal has been cancelled. I'm going to see how they're going to smuggle this in through that Black Sea now. In addition to the tanks, the minister also announced the dispatch during summer of 10 armoured personnel carriers after major repairs and several armoured all-terrain vehicles, trucks and ambulances. Now, this is now Spain bragging about what they're going to give to the Ukraine. Spanish people are suffering. Spanish citizens are struggling. But this is what their leadership is doing. And I've got news for this chick. 25 tanks and fighting vehicles gone in a blink. The Ukrainian defeat near Tokmakcha was worse than we thought. So, exactly how long is that 4 tanks going to last? From rough calculations, I would say about an hour. Great contribution to the war. And then there's something else that I need to mention here, and I'm not going to try and find the clip because I did say that. The Ukrainian soldiers are sabotaging those Leopard tanks so that they don't need to go onto the front with them. They are sabotaging it. Why? Because the Russians are paying a bounty to their soldiers for every Leopard destroyed. Those Leopard tanks are royal game, and the Ukrainian soldiers don't want to be in them on the front because they know they're not going to last. There was one guy that made a video about how stupid the Russians are building Leopard 2 tanks out of wood models, scaled 1:1. Perfect. And they found them somewhere there in the Donbass. And they made a moor of a story about how stupid the Russians are. What that little idiot that made the video did not realize that those models were built specifically to program the drones, their targeting systems, to fine-tune and specifically identify Leopard tanks. And you can see it. When a Leopard tank appears somewhere on that front, there's a drone on it almost immediately. But they think they are clever, and they're trying to make the Russians out as idiots for building wooden tanks. Stupid fuckers didn't realize that the Russians were giving their drone programmers an exact target to program into those drones. But there's an old thing, Moses 6 verse 6, stupid people must suffer. And then we get to this. And look at that picture first. Look at that row of tanks. There's 10 tanks on that piece of the train. That train is a hell of a long train. I don't want to put the video in here. But in this clip here that I took, you can see 10 tanks there. Yippee! The Spanish has offered and donated 4 tanks. There's 10 in this one shot coming from a Russian factory. And it was a hell of a long train. I couldn't count how many tanks were on there. But it was a long train. And this is what the Spanish want to offset with their gracious donation of 4 tanks. NATO is commanded by idiots. Uralvagon Zavod has more than tripled its production rates over the past year. The approach to meeting the needs of the front allowed the company to deliver another batch of advanced T-90M breakthrough tanks and modernized T-72B3M tanks to the Russian army. All the tasks set by the state in providing the army with reliable military equipment, the Ural Vagon Zavod team fulfills qualitatively and on time. This is proved by the consistently good evaluations that Ural Vagon Zavod's armored vehicles receive from the military personnel involved in the special military operations. The highly qualified staff of the plant works tirelessly for the benefit of our soldiers, modernizing the existing armored vehicles and creating from scratch the most advanced tanks. Thus, the termination of the grain agreement also means the termination of the activities of the military structures of the Ukrainian armed forces, which are successfully disguising themselves in southern ports pretending that they are carrying out a humanitarian mission. Take note of that. And I've got another video, and I'll show it at some stage, of a Russian officer talking about the NATO equipment. It was an eye-opener. NATO is in deep shit. There's no other word for it. And I'm going to show you now an image that is totally out of whack for a news program. But you must look at it. Look at that. Look at that girl. Look at her dress. And look where she is. On a harvested wheat field. How fucking out of place is this? There's no photographic concept to validate taking a picture like this. But this is NATO on the battlefield. Think about that. This is NATO on the battlefield. Beautiful curves, sexy clothing, the lot. But that cat cannot do anything positive on that field. Nothing. She's got absolutely nothing in her favor to make her fit into that environment. And that is NATO on the battlefield. And then you get this brilliant Annalena Baerbock from Germany. German Foreign Minister Baerbock. Every missile fired at the port of Odessa is also a missile fired at the starving people of this world. Ach, fucking shame. The statistics that has been published, and not only by the Russians, but by the Turks as well, of the destinations of those grain shipments. 3% of it went to the developing world. The other 97% went to the fucking EU. That is that much debated grain deal with Russia. And they make the Russians out as being the scum of the earth for cancelling the grain deal. But they don't publish the facts that many of those grain ships were loaded with weapons. The grain route was used to attack the Kursk breach. And the grain that is exported out there is going to the EU, not to the so-called starving people. And now Putin is the scoundrel for cancelling the grain deal. The fucking West made a deal with him. Okay? open up the grain route, and we from the West will lift the sanctions on the agricultural banks of Russia so that Russia could export their grain and fertilizer to Africa and the East. They merrily accepted the transfer of Ukrainian grain from that Odessa port, but they never lifted the sanctions. As usual, the West is fucking good in breaking agreements. They've got no integrity, they've got no intelligence, they've got no smarts. And then Baerbock says every missile, and every one of those missiles, I watched that stuff closely. Every one of those missiles was sent to weapon caches or weapon loading facilities in that Odessa port. So don't come with that shit that the suffering people of the world is now deprived. Bullshit. And I'm going to end this rant with this image. Look at it carefully. That is NATO standing in that tank. I don't know what her terms of surrender are, but I'm willing to listen. The irony. But that's the reality. The Western people need to accept NATO is screwed. NATO is now clearly shown as a toothless old dog, making a lot of sloppy sounds and barking and growling like hell, but useless. Now the real nightmare for the West lies in the following. If Russia defeats NATO in Ukraine convincingly, which it looks like is happening, what are those old East Bloc European states going to do now? They will have to ask themselves, how much value do we really have in the security guarantees from NATO and the US? And the Baltic states are the ones that should not even go to bed, because their shit is booked. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. Thank you for your support.